The convoy was supposed to pass through quietly, another routine mission in a war that felt endless. But when the ambush came, it was swift and merciless. Bullets tore through the air, trapping a squad of American soldiers in a ruined compound outside Mosul. As hope faded and ammunition ran low, one of the newest members, a woman few had taken seriously, volunteered for the most dangerous position in the building, the sniper's nest. Her teammates doubted her. Some even laughed. No one expected her to make it out alive. But none of them could imagine that in the next few minutes, their fates would rest in her hands. If you're enjoying this story of courage under fire, make sure to hit that subscribe button and stick around for more incredible true stories of heroism. Now, let's dive into Jamie's story. So let me tell you about Jamie Carter. This woman was tough as nails, but she'd been fighting an uphill battle her whole military career. Picture this. She's one of the first women in her unit to actually qualify as a sniper. We're talking about a time when that was still pretty rare. And let me tell you, she had to work twice as hard as everyone else just to get half the respect. Jamie grew up in rural Pennsylvania, the kind of place where you learn to shoot a rifle before you learn to drive stick shift. Her dad took her hunting every weekend from the time she was 8 years old. By the time she was 12, she could hit a moving target at 200 yards without breaking a sweat. But shooting deer in the Pennsylvania woods? That's a whole different world from what she was about to face in Iraq. When she joined the Army, Jamie thought her shooting skills would speak for themselves. Boy, was she wrong. The guys in her unit, they were a mixed bag. Some were grizzled veterans who'd seen multiple deployments. Others were fresh-faced recruits just like her. But they all had one thing in common. They looked at Jamie and saw someone who didn't belong. It wasn't always outright hostility, you know? Sometimes it was worse. It was that patronizing kind of doubt. Like when she'd nail every target on the range, and someone would say, "Not bad for a girl." Or when they'd automatically assume she couldn't carry her share of the gear. Jamie learned to keep her mouth shut and let her actions do the talking. But deep down, it ate at her. So there they were, 6 months into deployment, and their squad had gotten pretty tight. You know how it is in war zones. You either bond with your team or you don't survive. Jamie had slowly earned her place, but she still felt like she was constantly proving herself. This particular day started like any other. The sun was beating down mercilessly. And if you've never been to Iraq in the summer, imagine opening an oven door and sticking your face right in front of it. That's what it felt like every single day. They were doing what they called a presence patrol. Basically just driving around, showing the flag, making sure the bad guys knew American forces were still in the area. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez was leading the patrol. He was this tough-as-leather guy from Texas who'd been in the Army for 15 years. Rodriguez had finally started treating Jamie like one of the team, which was a big deal. Then you had Corporal Thompson, the unit's designated marksman, and honestly, one of the cockiest guys you'd ever meet. He was good with a rifle, don't get me wrong, but he never let anyone forget it. There was also Martinez, barely 19 and scared out of his mind most of the time, but trying hard to hide it. Jackson, who'd been counting down the days to his discharge since the moment he arrived. And Private Peterson, who had this nervous habit of cracking jokes when things got tense. They were driving through the outskirts of Mosul in 2 up-armored Humvees. The neighborhood was mostly empty, too dangerous for civilians, but not quite abandoned. You know those places where you can feel eyes watching you from every window? That was this area. Jamie was riding shotgun in the second vehicle, scanning the rooftops through her scope, when everything went to hell. The first RPG came out of nowhere. 1 second they're rolling down this dusty street, and the next second there's this massive explosion right in front of the lead vehicle. The sound was deafening, like getting hit in the chest with a sledgehammer while someone screams directly into your ears. The lead Humvee lurched to a stop, smoke pouring from the engine. Then the gunfire started. And I'm talking about serious firepower here. AK-47s, RPGs, probably some heavy machine guns mixed in there too. The insurgents had set up what's called a kill box. They'd waited for the convoy to get into this narrow street where there was nowhere to run, then hit them from multiple directions at once. Contact! Contact! We're taking heavy fire! Rodriguez was screaming into his radio, but all they got back was static. The radio had taken a hit, or maybe the insurgents were jamming their frequency. Either way, they were on their own. Jamie's driver, Specialist Cook, was frantically looking for somewhere to take cover. The street was lined with these bombed-out buildings, remnants from years of fighting. Cook spotted what looked like an old residential compound and gunned it toward the entrance. "There, that building," Jamie shouted, pointing at a 3-story structure that still had most of its walls intact. It wasn't much, but it was better than staying in the kill zone. Both Humvees managed to make it to the compound, but just barely. As they were bailing out of the vehicles, Jamie could hear bullets pinging off the armor plating. Thompson, their designated marksman, was helping someone out of the lead vehicle when a sniper's bullet caught him in the shoulder. He went down hard, his rifle clattering across the courtyard. Inside the building, chaos reigned. Martinez was hyperventilating in the corner. Jackson was trying to treat Thompson's wound while cursing a blue streak. Peterson had gone completely quiet, never a good sign with him, and Rodriguez was trying to figure out their next move while bullets kept smacking into the walls around them. "How many we got out there?" Rodriguez asked, peering carefully through a crack in one of the boarded-up windows. "Too many," Jackson replied grimly. "I count at least 3 different firing positions, maybe more." Jamie was doing her own assessment. She could hear the enemy fighters coordinating. They were speaking Arabic, but you didn't need to understand the language to know they were organizing for an assault. The insurgents knew the Americans were trapped, and they were taking their time, methodically surrounding the building. "Sir, we need someone up high," Jamie said quietly. "Someone needs to get to the top floor, get eyes on their positions." Rodriguez nodded. "Thompson's our marksman, but..." He looked over at Thompson, who was pale and clutching his shoulder. The man was in no condition to climb stairs, let alone take precision shots. "I can do it," Jamie said. The room went quiet for a moment. Peterson let out this nervous laugh. "You sure you're up for this, Carter? This isn't the practice range." Jamie felt that familiar fire in her belly, the same feeling she'd had every time someone questioned whether she belonged. But this time was different. This time, lives were on the line. "I'm sure," she said, grabbing Thompson's rifle. The weapon was heavier than her usual M4, but she'd trained with it before. She checked the scope, tested the bolt action. Everything seemed to be in working order. The staircase was narrow and covered in debris. Every step Jamie took seemed to echo through the building, and she was sure the enemy could hear her moving. But she kept climbing, one step at a time, trying to control her breathing like her instructors had taught her. On the second floor, she could hear Rodriguez and the others setting up defensive positions below. They were dragging furniture in front of windows, checking their ammunition, preparing for a siege. The whole building smelled like dust and cordite and fear. When Jamie reached the 3rd floor, she found herself in what used to be someone's bedroom. There was still a child's drawing taped to one wall, a crayon picture of a house with stick figures that might have been a family. It hit her then, the reality of where she was. This wasn't some abstract battlefield. This was someone's home, someone's life that had been destroyed by war. But she didn't have time for philosophy. Through the window, she could see the enemy positions. There were insurgents moving between buildings, using the maze of alleys and bombed-out structures for cover. And there, on a rooftop about 300 meters away, she spotted the glint of a rifle scope. Enemy sniper. Jamie's hands were shaking as she set up her position. She'd done this hundreds of times in training, but this was different. This was real. If she missed, that sniper would zero in on her position and probably take her head off. If she hit her target, she'd save lives. No pressure, right? She could hear her old instructor's voice in her head. "Breathing is everything. Control your breathing. Control your shot. Inhale, exhale, halfway. Hold, squeeze." Through her scope, Jamie could see the enemy sniper clearly now. He was young, maybe early 20s, with a scraggly beard. He was scanning the building with his own rifle, looking for targets. In a few seconds, he'd spot her window. Jamie lined up her shot. The crosshairs settled on the target's center mass. She took a deep breath, let half of it out, held it, and squeezed the trigger. The rifle kicked against her shoulder. Through the scope, she saw the enemy sniper jerk backward and disappear behind the wall. Direct hit. But her victory was short-lived. Almost immediately, she started taking return fire. Bullets shattered the window frame around her, sending splinters of wood flying. The insurgents knew where she was now. Downstairs, she could hear her squad mates cheering. "Nice shot, Carter," someone yelled. But Jamie was already moving, crawling to a different window. Staying in one position too long was a death sentence. From her new vantage point, she could see the bigger picture. And it wasn't good. While she'd been focused on the sniper, another group of insurgents had been moving around the back of the building. They were setting up for a flanking attack, and her squad had no idea they were coming. "Rodriguez!" she shouted down the stairs. "They're flanking us! East side of the building!" But even as she called out the warning, Jamie realized her teammates couldn't do anything about it. They were pinned down by fire from the front. If they moved to defend the back, they'd be exposed to the shooters in front. It was a classic tactical trap. That's when she saw him, an insurgent with an RPG launcher, creeping through the rubble toward the building's rear entrance. If he got close enough to fire that thing, it would collapse part of the building and probably kill everyone inside. Jamie had one shot, maybe two if she was lucky. The angle was all wrong. She was firing down at a steep angle, which threw off all her calculations. The target was moving, using cover effectively, and she was taking fire from at least two other positions. But she had to try. Jamie forced herself to slow down, to think. She remembered something her father had taught her during those hunting trips back in Pennsylvania. When you're under pressure, he'd said, when your heart is pounding and everything's going wrong, that's when you have to trust your training. Trust your instincts. She tracked the RPG gunner through her scope, watching his movement pattern. He was being careful, but he was also in a hurry. He'd dash from one piece of cover to another, pause for a few seconds, then move again. She needed to anticipate where he'd be, not where he was. The gunner made his next move, sprinting toward a pile of concrete blocks. Jamie led him slightly, adjusting for the distance and the angle. She could hear bullets hitting the wall behind her, but she blocked it out. Everything came down to this moment. She squeezed the trigger. The RPG gunner stumbled and fell, the launcher skittering away across the rubble. Jamie had hit him center mass. The immediate threat to her squad was eliminated. But the fight wasn't over. What happened next was like something out of an action movie, except it was real and terrifying, and Jamie was running on pure adrenaline. With their RPG gunner down and their sniper eliminated, the insurgents started to panic. They'd planned for a quick, overwhelming assault, but now they were taking casualties, and their coordination was falling apart. Jamie took advantage of their confusion. She spotted a machine gun team setting up on a nearby rooftop and put 2 rounds through their position. Then she switched to another window and picked off an insurgent who was trying to advance on the building. Each shot was deliberate, calculated. Jamie had found what snipers call the zone, that mental state where everything else disappears and there's only you, your rifle, and the target. Her hands had stopped shaking. Her breathing was steady. She was in complete control. Downstairs, Rodriguez and the others could hear the change in the battle. The enemy fire was becoming more sporadic, less coordinated. "Whatever you're doing up there, Carter, keep doing it," Rodriguez shouted. And then, like a miracle, they heard it, the distant sound of helicopters. Reinforcements were finally arriving. The cavalry was coming. The insurgents heard the helicopters too, and they knew what it meant. Within minutes, they'd be facing not just a trapped squad of Americans, but Apache attack helicopters and probably a quick reaction force as well. The smart ones started withdrawing immediately, but some of them kept fighting, either too stubborn or too committed to give up. Jamie kept them pinned down until the Apaches arrived and finished the job with a few well-placed Hellfire missiles. When the shooting finally stopped, Jamie sat in that bombed-out bedroom for a long moment, just breathing. Her ears were ringing from the gunfire. Her hands were cramped from gripping the rifle, and she was suddenly, overwhelmingly exhausted. But she'd done it. She'd held the line when everything was falling apart. She'd saved her squad. The climb down those stairs was completely different from the climb up. When she'd gone up, she'd been scared. uncertain, fighting against doubt. When she came down, she was walking into a room full of soldiers who looked at her with genuine respect for the first time. "Holy shit, Carter," Peterson said, and for once his voice wasn't mocking. "That was incredible." Thompson, still nursing his wounded shoulder, nodded at her. "Hell of a job up there. Hell of a job." Even Rodriguez, who was usually stingy with praise, clapped her on the shoulder. "Outstanding work, soldier. You saved our asses." The quick reaction force secured the area and evacuated the wounded. When the dust settled and the after-action reports were written, the official record would show that Specialist Jamie Carter had eliminated 7 enemy combatants, including a sniper and an RPG gunner, while under heavy fire and with minimal support. But for Jamie, the real victory wasn't in the official records. It was in the way her squad mates looked at her now. The jokes stopped. The condescending comments disappeared. She wasn't the girl trying to be a soldier anymore. She was just another member of the team. More than that, she'd proven something to herself. All those years of fighting for respect, of constantly having to justify her presence, it had been worth it. When the moment came, when lives were on the line, she delivered. The story of what happened in that ruined house outside Mosul became legend in their battalion. It was told and retold, passed down to new soldiers as an example of courage under fire and the importance of never judging someone by appearances. Jamie Carter went on to complete 2 more deployments and eventually became a sniper instructor herself, training the next generation of soldiers. And every time someone questioned whether they belonged, whether they were tough enough or good enough, she'd tell them about that day in Mosul when everything came down to one person, one rifle, and the courage to act when it mattered most.